Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for Eden's Verse Iconoclasm Savage. This is the third new Savage raid made available by patch 5.2 in Final Fantasy XIV, Echoes of a Fallen Star. Please note that the perfect strategies are still being optimized for this fight and may change over time. My name is MTQ and I'll be your raid guide. MT Wave is a heavy-hitting raid-wide blast. Healers be ready with those shields and heals. Up next, a random tank will be tethered and targeted for Unshadowed Stake. This is a two-part line tank buster that will aim towards the tethered tank for both hits, regardless of enmity swapping. The first is a heavy-hitting solo tank buster with a debuff that the tank will need to mitigate appropriately. This first part of the attack should be angled away from the rest of the group. After a moment, another line attack will blast towards the tank, dealing massive shareable damage. To handle this, the tank can take both hits with an immunity away from the raid. If this isn't possible, they will need to take the first hit with cooldowns away from the raid and then move behind the group to share the incoming damage. This damage will apply the most damage to the first player hit and then disperse among the rest of the group based on proximity. As such, the unaffected tank will need to pop mild cooldowns and stand in front of the rest of the group to soak the brunt of damage. You could also have the two tanks soak the second hit together with tons of cooldowns, but I'll leave that one up to you. Up next, the boss will cast Words of Motion. Two void gates will form on the south edge of the platform, and eventually two sets of bird clumps will form on the north edge in a sequence. The southern void gates will always spawn in the same orientation, with a red gate on the west side and a blue gate on the east. The order and pattern that the clumps of birds will form on the north edge is random, but it'll work out every time that one of the gates is hit by a bird attack first and then the other. Players will first need to move out of the lane of the first bird clump to form and quickly identify which gate will be blasted first. They'll need to keep this first void gate in mind for now. After the first bird clump attack, players will adjust to avoid getting hit by the second bird blast. At this point, random patterns of red and blue void gates will also spawn on the north, east, and west sides. Players will soon need to dodge the incoming bird blasts, the order of which is determined by which original void gate was blasted first by the birds. The void gates on the east and north will always be where the blasts originate from in each round. Each void gate will blast across the platform and can hit a void gate of the same or opposite color. When an opposite color void gate is hit, the next round blast will begin with that color void gate instead. At first glance, this is incredibly confusing, so don't feel bad if your head starts reeling. Luckily, the possible patterns of attack make dodging each blast pretty simple. I'll be showing you one possible dodge strat, but you're free to come up with what works best for your group. The first step after dodging the first round of bird blasts and determining which void gate in the south was hit first is to divide the group into two. You'll want one tank, one healer, and two damage dealers in each group. Then each group will move to their assigned dodge spots in the northwest and northeast of the platform. As it works out, the uttermost segments of the platform allow players to only need to pay attention to the void gates blasting from the east, simplifying the dodge to an easy north or south movement. Once the void gates come out, all players should determine which of their two segments will be blasted first and move to the other safe segment. This will be from the same color of the first gate to be bird blasted. As soon as that blast occurs, players will quickly move into that dodge segment to avoid the second blast. While you do this, you'll need to check what color void gate that first blast is going into. If it's the same color, then you know to expect the first blast from the same color void gate in the next round. If it's the opposite color, then you know to expect the next round to start with a blast from the opposite color. The next round of void gates will form in a new pattern, but since you've already determined which color void gate is blasting first, you'll be ready to pre-position in the safe segment as necessary. There are 3 total portal rounds that players will have to dodge before the platform returns to normal. Next up, the boss will cast Betwixt worlds, and 2 rocky formations will split up the pattern into 3 sections. As these formations spawn, all players will be knocked to one of the 2 sides in the center. The boss will then cast Words of Spite, which will form 4 bird clumps on the northern edge of the platform that will tether to all damage dealers. At the same time, the boss casts Away with Thee, and all players will be afflicted with a teleportation debuff and marker. These markers will force players in a specific direction relative to their character's position at the end of its duration. During this time, the boss will also cast Silver Sledge and mark up both healers for stack-up markers. This attack will also apply a magic vulnerability down debuff on affected players, meaning they will not be able to stack with players targeted by other attacks. All of these mechanics will resolve shortly after the teleportation debuff duration expires, so players will need to carefully control where they get teleported to automatically resolve all these mechanics at once. Let's take a look at how we do this. The 4 tethered damage dealers will be targeted for large line attacks in the direction of their tether. Since we don't want overlap here, we know these players need to end up sufficiently spread to avoid death. The healers will obviously need to share their damage with someone. As such, we assign a tank to stack with each healer. Since the platform is limited by inside these rock formations, we need to have specific players get teleported into specific locations to resolve these mechanics at once. Each tank and healer pair will be sent directly west and east, past the rocky formations to the outer edges of the platform. We also assign 2 damage dealers to traverse the rocks to the outer edge, but they stay as close to the north side of the platform as possible to ensure their line attacks are not hitting anyone else. Finally, 2 damage dealers will stay within the center section, one on each side to ensure they're not overlapping each other. Since the teleportation markers are stuck in a fixed direction relative to your character's position, I would recommend players get used to keeping an eye on their duration debuff. At around 3 seconds left or so, they'll need to position their characters to ensure their teleportation markers are pointing into their assigned positions. You will have very little time to adjust, so make sure you aim appropriately. Players that use auto face target here need to be extremely careful. Once all of these mechanics resolve, the platform will return to normal. Healers will have to prepare for another empty wave raid-wide blast. This is followed by another unshadowed stake double tank buster. Next up, the boss will cast Birds of Motion again. This is immediately followed by a false moonlight cast that will place circle AoEs underneath all players and then mark them all up for targeted AoE attacks that will leave behind silver scourge puddles that persist for some time. This bird clump pattern is static for this combo, and the outer edge will always blast first, with the inner lanes blasting second. To handle all of this, players will begin by stacking up in the middle, dropping all the AoE circles in a controlled manner. Then they'll all spread to assigned positions to drop off their AoE puddles. These assigned positions will have to be on the outer edges of the center lanes to ensure players have enough room for the next set of mechanics. As soon as the first bird clumps blast the outer edges, all players will move to the outer edges to avoid the center bird blasts. Away with thee will then mark up all players for teleportation, and immediately after, all tanks and healers will be marked for silver shot AoE circles, and a random damage dealer will be targeted for his stack up marker. The puddles persist on the platform this entire time, further limiting your positioning. To handle this, we assign positions for all tanks and healers that allows them to avoid overlap. This leaves the very center of the platform open for all the damage dealers to stack together and share their damage. Players will have to aim their teleportation markers into their assigned spots at the end of the debuff duration, as there will be very little time to adjust their positioning before all of the attacks hit. At this point, the boss will disappear and the ad phase begins. 2 tankable idolatry ads will spawn in the east and west of the platform, and a blasphemy ad will spawn in the north. The blasphemy ad cannot be tanked and will independently begin to move around the platform in a clockwise or counterclockwise direction. All of these ads need to be kept away from one another or they will tether and get buffed. That means tanks will need to pull their respective ads around the platform as the blasphemy moves, making sure to keep them all away from each other at all times. You'll have until the blasphemy makes one full rotation of the platform before the ads enrage and you die. If you kill the blasphemy first, the other 2 ads will enrage and you will die. As such, players will need to split up and destroy the 2 idolatry ads before they focus on the blasphemy ad. As the blasphemy moves around the platform, it will stop at specific points to throw out mechanics at you. All players will need to dodge these line attacks as they pop up. Insatiable Light will mark up 2 players with the stack up marker. Since your group is already split up to destroy each ad, you can simply stack on your ad to soak that damage. The idolatry ads will then both cast Advent of Light. This cast must be interrupted or you will die. Make sure you keep dodging the line attacks as necessary. The next stack up marker will coincide with more line attacks, and players will need to move together to dodge the lines and remain stacked to soak the damage. Next up, the idolatry ads will both cast Strength in Numbers, and the boss will cast Away with Thee, marking up all players for teleportation. Strength in Numbers has 2 possible configurations based on the animation of the ad. This is entirely random, so you'll need to pay attention before moving appropriately. If the ad is rotating vertically, it'll cast a large donut attack. All players will need to move into melee range to avoid this. If the ad is rotating horizontally, it'll cast a massive point blank AoE, and all players will need to move out of melee range to avoid that. Next, the timer of the teleportation debuffs will line up with another stack up marker. To handle this, all players will need to position their characters to get teleported in the direction consistent with the ad movement. As soon as each player is teleported, the stack up damage will go off, so make sure you stick together. Immediately after, the idolatry ads will cast another Strength in Numbers. Pay attention to the animation and move appropriately. Make sure you're dodging another round of lines at the same time and eventually stacking for another share marker. At this point, the blasphemy ad has almost made a full rotation, and your ad should be close to dead. Once an idolatry ad is destroyed, the other will begin to cast Explosion. If this cast goes off, you will die. As such, these 2 ads must be destroyed practically at the same time. Once the 2 idolatry ads are down, the blasphemy ad will begin to pulse a high damage raid-wide blast 6 times before it too begins to cast Explosion. Obviously, there is a lot of damage going out at this time, so healers beware. You will need to destroy the this ad before the cast goes off, or you will die. Once all the ads are down, the boss will cast a heavy-hitting empty flood to transition the phase. Pop those raid cooldowns and stack up for heals. At this point, the platform will return to normal. Unjoined aspect will affect all players with either a dark umbral effect or light astral effect debuff. During the duration of this debuff, players will only be able to take damage from attacks of the opposite color, or they will die. Each time they get hit by an attack of the opposite color, their debuff will also swap to that color. The boss will then cast Words of Unity, and the birds will form in 2 colors across the north side of the platform. Players will need to move to the side of the opposite color. Immediately after, the closest player to each color will be tethered and marked with this lineup marker. This tether must be moved away to reduce damage, and the line of damage will be shared with the first player taking the highest amount of damage. Each tank will need to make sure they're in front of their group at this time. At this point, the boss will cast Words of Entrapment. This will cause 4 large bird clumps to spawn on each side of the platform and 4 towers in each corner, 2 of each color. The towers must be soaked by players of the opposite colors or they will explode and you will die. The bird clumps will tether to the closest player, regardless of color, and then blast across the platform in their direction. To avoid overlap and unnecessary player deaths, we assign each player to a specific duty. In our group, we have the tanks and healers handle the bird clumps by having them be the closest players to each one and baiting the tethers as soon as they spawn. This will allow them to drag the clumps into specific lanes, ensuring that they don't overlap at all. We do this by dragging each clump into the inner right lane of the side that they spawn on. The damage dealers will all be assigned to 2 towers, standing in the tower of the opposite color to their debuff. All of these mechanics will resolve at the same time. The boss will then cast another Words of Unity, and players will again need to go to the side of the opposite color to their debuff. The closest player will be tethered and marked for lineup in the same manner as before. At this point, the group's debuffs will expire, but of course, the boss will cast Unjoined aspect immediately after. This time, all the tanks and healers will share the same color debuff, while all the damage dealers share the other. Void gates will appear in the south, and Words of Night will spawn dark and light bird clumps in the north in a random pattern. In this void gate round, players must now associate the red or blue void gates with either the white or dark blast, based on the first blast. Then, when they're dodging the void gate blast, they need to stand in the blasts of the opposite color to their debuff. Again, it is really easy to confuse yourself, so let's break it down. Step 1, all players will stand in the first blast of the opposite color. As they do this, they'll need to remember what void gates are blasting what color. To keep things simple in my brain, I like to memorize only what color void gate the umbral attack is coming from, and then position my character based on that one element, instead of trying to think about 4 things at once. Players will then split up and move into their assigned dodge sections. They'll need to look to the east and see which pattern the void gates are shooting in, positioning themselves to take the blast of the opposite color. As this is happening, they'll need to identify if the gates are blasting into the same colored void gates or different ones, as this will affect where the dark and light blasts are coming from in the next round. Before the next round of void gates, the boss will cast False Dawn, and all players will drop down AoE circles beneath them. Since we don't want to cover our dodge segments, we have all players move into the center of the platform to drop off their circles. At this time, the next round of void gates spawn, and each player will need to move into the segment that will be blasted by the opposite color of their debuff that was determined by the previous round of void gates. However, all players will also be targeted by an AoE circle of the same color as their debuff. Since all tanks and healers share a color and all damage dealers share the other, our original group split based on roles works to our advantage here, and this circle attack really only serves to force players to spread within their safe segment. This makes it possible to assign specific spots for each player to stand in their segments with their circles to completely avoid overlap, regardless of which lane they need to get blasted by. There will be a third round of void gate blasts, and players will again need to adjust by getting hit by the blast of the opposite color. Next up, the boss will cast another empty wave. Healers be ready for this raid-wide damage. This is followed up by another Unshadowed Stake Tank Buster, immunity if available, or share the second hit with the group as necessary. Eventually, the boss will disappear and the final phase begins. A knockback marker will appear in the center of the platform. This knockback cannot be avoided, and all players must pre-position themselves with their backs to a corner or they will be flung off the platform. The boss will then reappear in the center of the platform in the form of a tornado and cast another Unjoined aspect that will mark up 1 tank, 1 healer, and 2 DPS with 1 color, and the rest of the players with the opposite color. Furthermore, 3 lines of AoEs will begin to spin around the boss, essentially dividing the platform into 3 rotating segments. Light and dark orbs will also spawn around the platform that must be popped by players of the opposite color or you will die. To handle this, we split the group up into 3. The 2 tanks will start in the south. All players with the light astral debuff will start northwest, and all players with the dark umbral debuff will start northeast. As the group moves around the platform within the rotating segments, they'll need to pop orbs in a specific order based on their debuffs. Communication Communication during this phase is key as the orbs explode in a wide AoE blast when popped, and you don't have much room to work with anyway. Be careful not to get cut by the AoE partitions as you pop your orbs as well. After almost a full rotation, the boss will cast threefold Grace, and the entire platform will be covered by either light or dark zones. Players will need to position their characters in the color opposite to their debuff. This will cast 3 times in a row, with the floor pattern changing every time, and players will need to take care to stand in the appropriate color based on their debuff. Immediately after, the boss will cast 2 empty wave casts in a row. Healers be ready with cooldowns and shields. At this point, the boss will cast another Unjoined aspect, and this combo of mechanics repeats. Players can pre-position in the same manner and be ready to pop orbs as they rotate around the boss. Another 3 threefold Grace casts, and players will need to adjust into the appropriately colored zones with each one. Another 2 empty wave casts, and you'll have a bit of time to damage the boss freely. 2 more empty wave casts, and then the boss will begin his hard enrage empty flood cast. You'll need to destroy the boss before this time, or you will die. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Up next, we're heading into Eden's Verse Refulgence Savage. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.